guys, we're going to start our read aloud today. Beau at Ballard Creek. This is by Kirkpatrick Hill. If you remember, Kirkpatrick Hill was also the author of The Year of Miss Agnes. This is brand new for all of us, and I think it's going to be really exciting. Beau is an orphan, and she winds up with a really unusual family. So let's find out about them. Chapter 1 is called Like Turtles. Beau had 2 fathers and no mother. After she got 2 fathers, she got a brother too, but not in the usual way. Her 2 fathers were Jack Johnson and Arvard Iverson. They'd come to Alaska with the 1897 Klondike Gold Rush when they were young, a long time before they got Beau. The girl that Jack was going to marry had died, and Arvard had just buried his mother, so they didn't have any reason to stay where they were. They were both extra big, not just tall, not that beanpole tall, but the kind of massive tall, 6'4", 6'5", with huge deep voices and powerful big fists. And they were both blacksmiths too, her fathers. But those were the only ways they were the same. Of course, Beau figured out when she wasn't too old that her family was not like any other family in Ballard Creek. The Eskimo children had mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles and cousins. "Do I have a mama?" she asked one day. "Well, everyone has a mama," said Jack, "but sometimes mamas don't stick around, you know. Just walk off. Lots of animals like that." He was quiet for a minute, trying to think of an animal that took off and didn't hang around. "Turtles!" he said suddenly. "Where I come from, they got big turtles. Lay their eggs in a hole and just walk away." Beau considered that. "Did my mama walk away?" "Sure did," said Jack, "and lucky for us. Someone giving away babies. Just what me and Arvard needed." Beau knew about giving away babies. Gracie had given away her baby girl, Evangelina, to Big Jim and Dishu because they didn't have any babies, and Gracie had 2, and 1 was really enough. So that was enough of an answer for Beau when she was little. Jack had a real name, Gideon, but when he came up north, right away he got the name Blackjack because he was a blacksmith. And besides, his last name was Jackson. He liked that name fine because he didn't like Gideon. Arvard was called Swede by nearly everyone, or Big Swede, because he was. Everyone had nicknames in the Klondike days. It was very popular. Jack used to tell Beau some of the crazy names and how the people got them to make her laugh, like Tin Kettle George, Slobbery Tom, Pete the Pig, and Calamity Bill. Sometimes there were girls that had nicknames too, like Gold Tooth Gertie and Rompin' Rosie. Jack said those nicknames were good and that they made all the people happy. Beau called Jack Papa, and she called Arvard Papa. No one remembered how she decided on Papa, but it was right about the time she learned to talk. She was too little to understand that nobody would know who she was talking about if they were both called the same thing. So that's the way it stayed, Papa for both of them. And actually, somehow it didn't get mixed up at all. Jack and Arvard knew each other first because of shirts. After he got to the Circle Mines, Arvard got himself a sewing machine. His mama had taught him to sew, and he was good at it. He figured he could make good money sewing shirts for men in his time off from blacksmithing. And he did. He even got to sew some dresses for girls, but they were much fussier than men. When Jack came to work at the Circle diggings, he heard about the shirt maker. Right away he looked for Arvard to sew him shirts because Jack was a big man. His arms were as big around as some women's waist, and his neck was as big as some men's legs. He couldn't just buy shirts from the trading post. When he found Arvard sewing in a room in the back of a saloon, they both started to laugh because they didn't often see men big as themselves. Arvard, in fact, he found, could make Jack's shirts the same measure as his own. Jack was happy that Arvard knew that big men needed some extra reinforcements at the seam, and they needed a little extra room around the belly. So that was how Arvid and Jack first met, and over the next 20 years, they came across each other in mining camps, and they'd laugh about the first shirt, maybe play a game of cards, and sometimes they'd partner up on the blacksmithing when there was a big job that needed to be done fast. When they got Bo, they were both working at a rampart mine on the Yukon. The gold rush was all over, and most of those thousands of early stampeders had quit the country when the big gold strikes played out. Alaska was nearly empty again. The stampeders left behind dozens of sad ghost towns, lonely stores with false fronts, abandoned old boats, paddle wheelers rotting on the sandbars, empty, echoing dance halls, their fancy oak floors and chandeliers thick with dust. The ones who stayed, like the men at the rampart mine, like Arvid and Jack, just stayed because the life pleased them, because they loved the country. So there they were at the rampart mine together, Jack cooking after the regular cook took off, and everyone glad about it, because Jack was better than good at cooking, and glad because the cook shack was always spotless when Jack ran it, with little things that made it home-like, maybe flowers on the table in the summer, or a cloth on the long table. That was because Jack had been raised in a kitchen of the big house down south, where Mama Nancy was in charge of meals and housekeeping. She taught Jack to cook and keep things nice when he was a boy, the way Arvid had been taught sewing. Both were very useful things for fathers, Bo always thought. It'd been a bad year at Rampart. The gold all played out, and Kovich, who owned the mine, was going to give it up after cleanup. He'd been a fair man to work for, and all the men were sorry he hadn't done well. Rampart would be another ghost town. All the miners at Rampart would be going out after cleanup. Some would take the boat upriver to Whitehorse so they could get the train and go down the inland passageway to Seattle and home. They'd leave the country. Maybe they'd come back, and maybe they wouldn't. Some of the men were headed to new diggings here and there. The mining on the Koyukuk said it was looking good. Jack was going to the Koyukuk camp on the next steamboat going down the Yukon, and so was Arvid. And that was why they got Bo, because everyone in camp knew they were headed downriver to Nalto. Everyone, including Mean Millie. Jack just couldn't get over how amazing it all was. If only one tiny little thing had been different, it wouldn't have happened. If they hadn't had to go to Nalto to wait for a scow going up the Koyukuk, if Arvid hadn't been standing outside when Mean Millie was getting on the steamboat, they wouldn't have Bo. Just the littlest thing could change a life, he said. Like someone bending down to tie a shoelace, or someone getting a splinter. Little things that make other things happen. He called it thinking backwards. Bo liked to think backwards like that a lot. If I hadn't spilled my cocoa at breakfast, if I hadn't taken so long to find the mop to clean it up, I wouldn't have been in the cook shack when the mouse came to the window. I wouldn't have been able to see them. The trouble was knowing when to stop. You could go backward forever if you like, if there was no cook shack or no mining camp, or if she'd never been born. It could get really silly after a while. And there's a little picture of Bo, and that's the end of our chapter 1.